Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are in the book of Ezekiel, and we're not very far in. We're 10 chapters, which puts us at about 20%. We have some space.
Well, it seems like it's far.
It seems
right?
like it's
We're 10 chapters in, but
there's 10 chapters, and there's a lot of stuff that has already happened. But yeah, we're still working our way into it from here.
Yeah, so last week, so we understand that Ezekiel is a prophet and a priest, and he is giving God's word to the remnant who are in Babylon, and that's his focus. And he's having some visions, and he knows that Jerusalem is going to be wiped out. And it's his job to convey that appropriately to the remnant that is in Babylon.
Yeah.
And to get them, and God calls them hard-headed and hard-hearted. So he has some unique things that kind of happen to him to get that idea across, right? He slept with a brick for a year, could only sleep on his left side, was bound up. But he was kind of acting out the pain and suffering, at least somewhat, that the people of Jerusalem would feel. Yeah. And now we're kind of going through Jerusalem being overrun this week 3 or 4 different ways and taking different views in it. So kind of an interesting week here this week.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's because like we said last time is that God will say something and then say it again, say it a little bit different way.
Yeah, it's like, what are we doing? We already know this, but it's reinforcing.
Well, because this is a really big problem. The idolatry that Israel had gotten into, both the northern kingdom and then the southern kingdom as well.
And the remnant.
Well, yeah. I mean, the remnant, the true remnant, is still faithful to God, and we saw that last time in the vision. And so, since we're talking about that, let's not forget we are in a vision. Okay, so what Ezekiel is seeing is not necessarily happening literally exactly the way it did happen or will happen, but it's showing him sort of a visual of, somewhat symbolically or whatever. So last time we said, Nebuchadnezzar didn't walk in with 6 guys with clubs.
Yeah. Well, a scribe wasn't marking
and a scribe wasn't marking people on their forehead, right?
But the end result was, whoever lived, God wanted to.
Right. The faithful ones were sealed, and the rest were killed or taken away, right? So chapter 11 now, we're in chapters 11 through 15 this time. Chapter 11 picks up right where we left off last time in chapter 10. He's still in the vision.
So here's the deal. Jerusalem's going to be overthrown. God has a house in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It's called the temple.
Yeah.
So how can he allow this to happen?
Right.
This is what chapter 11 is about.
And this really is one of the most devastating chapters, not just in Ezekiel, but really in Israel's history, as far as I'm concerned.
Where God says bye.
Yeah, where the glory of God, Ezekiel is actually going to see the glory of God. And when we talk about the glory, we're talking about his actual presence. He was there in the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant was. That's why only the high priest once a year, all of that could go in there. This was God's very presence. And in this chapter, these couple of chapters here, God is going to get up and move out. And he leaves Israel. He leaves the temple. He leaves Israel. It's devastating. It's sad.
Right. So Wynn takes Ezekiel to the East Temple Gate, and he recognized some of the people that are there, right? And it makes sense because he was taken. Mm-hmm. And these are the people that he has seen before. And these are officials, and these officials are telling the people the time is not near to build houses. The city's a cooking pot. We are the meat. It's kind of some odd things.
It's really weird. And so I did some looking around at some other translations and some commentaries because of this phrase, the time is not near to build houses. But that's
Nor should
true.
It be
right,
when you're under siege.
Yeah, that's true. So why is that considered false prophet? Well, I think we may have a translation issue here in the net. There are some other translations that say the same thing, but there are some others that actually put it into a question. Is not the time near to build houses? What they're saying is, Nebuchadnezzar's not going to come back. He's not going to really do all this destruction.
Right. Let's build. Yeah, we should be building houses.
So I don't think it was the time is not near. And so there are some Bible translations, and the Hebrew's a little rough. There's no punctuation. Sometimes the phrasing is not quite as clear as we'd like it to be. And so I really think what they were saying is, let's build houses. Is it not time? Let's do it.
Right.
So I think that's probably, and then the city is a cooking pot. We're the meat. Everything's going to finally be, like a cooking pot is going to protect them, because they're inside it. I think that's probably what's going on here. Yeah, because Ezekiel and the other prophets are saying, Nebuchadnezzar's coming.
Whoa, yeah.
And the false ones are saying, no, it's going to be fine.
Yeah, so God is saying, look, these men who are saying, build houses and we're the pot, these guys are evil and they're giving wicked advice. So Ezekiel was told to prophesize against them, and he did. And he says, here's what the sovereign Lord says, that you guys that have there's corpses that have been dumped, and they are the meat. And basically, what he's saying is that the Jewish officials were killing their own people.
Yeah, he's using their words
in a number
against
of ways.
them. Yeah,
right. And when they say, "Look, God's going to take care of it. God's on our side. God is always taking care of it. He's going to take care of it." God's not going to take care of it.
He will take care of something. God will take care of it, but not the way you think, not the way you want.
And then, so God says, look, you fear the sword. You fear being overrun. Everybody fears the sword. So the sword's going to be brought against you.
Yeah.
And specifically, it's going to be brought against these officials. And he's going to hand them over to foreigners. They're going to execute judgment. A number of them are going to die by the sword, and God is going to judge them.
Yeah.
And then you will know that I am the Lord. And again, that phrase was repeated last week. It's definitely repeated this week.
Yeah.
And it's the whole purpose where God is trying to bring glory back to himself.
Yeah.
Then you will know I am the Lord.
I love verses 16 and 17 though, because there's in a lot of the judgment passages there's a little bit of hope.
Yep.
And in verse 16, God says, "Although I've removed them far away among the nations and dispersed them among the countries, I have been a little sanctuary for them among the lands where they have gone. And then when I regather you from the peoples and assemble you from the lands where you've been dispersed, I will give you back the country of Israel."
So God does that a lot, right? When he's bringing judgment, and you're like, how can this happen? He brings hope in, too.
Yeah.
All right, get it? This needs to happen. Here's what's going to happen afterwards.
And it's because he's made covenant promises with Israel that need to be fulfilled. He cannot wipe them out or let anyone else wipe them out. And so even though there's going to be great destruction and punishment and judgment, there is that remnant, there is that faithful group. And I love the fact that he said, I've been a little sanctuary for them. I just love that.
So chapter 12, Ezekiel is back in Babylon. And he's talking to the people there, and he's told to act out what's happening to the people in Jerusalem, and when they have to leave, and when they're going to be taken in exile. And God wants Ezekiel to remind the people that they are rebellious, they are hard-headed, they've had many chances, but this is what's going to happen. So Ezekiel is told to pack his belongings and act like an exile.
Yeah.
So each day he needs to pack up what he has, throw it on his back, and leave.
Yeah.
He takes it pretty far, where he actually even digs a hole in the wall in his house and doesn't use the door, but he escapes.
Yep.
So that's kind of wild.
Well, and he can't. But again, we've said that he's an object lesson.
Right.
And he is supposed to cover his face so he can't see the ground.
Yep.
And
we find out why in a little bit.
Yeah. So again, he's talking to the exiles, telling them what's going to happen back in Jerusalem. It's not like they are not already exiled and they're going to go through this, but this is what's going to happen. And if you remember from the end of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, Zedekiah, his eyes were poked out, and he did not see when he was taken into exile.
Right. So this part seems to be mimicking. He's called a prince in our words, but he's actually the king of the southern kingdom at that point in time. He is made to go before Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar kills his sons in front of him, and then has his eyes gouged out.
Yep.
And then he has to walk to Babylon.
Yeah.
And he spends the rest of his days in some servitude. I think at the end of his life, he is allowed to eat at the king's table there, but it's kind of a little bit late.
Too little, too late
at that time.
But so God is having Ezekiel somewhat act this out, saying this is going to happen, and he's letting the exiles who are already in Babylon know. I know this is what you're hearing. I know this is the message that everything is okay. We're going to build houses. Come on back. That's not true. Happen. It's not the case. That's false prophets.
And then there's a couple other prophecies. You can read about them, but the one we end with is, you may think these prophecies are in the future. this is going to happen soon.
Yeah.
And it will not be delayed any longer.
Which
Because God soon sometimes is still a long time. But
Well, and I think that's really important because sometimes from our perspective now, of course, we're way past this. We look at some of these prophecies and say, wow, that's terrible. You know, he's talking about regathering them. That must be the tribulation and the millennium. No, he's talking about Nebuchadnezzar and then the return after the exile. Right. And yes, there will be future judgment and future restoration. But I think that really helps us place. We are not talking
definitely helps
for our
us.
interpretation. We are supposed to be looking at the past, not the future, in these passages.
Yeah. So big picture, God is leaving. Everybody that's not marked is gonna be wiped out.
Yep.
Now we get to chapter 13, and God is talking about the false prophets now.
Yeah.
So now one of the reasons that he's doing this is because of false prophets, and we've been talking about it. You know, and imagine that you're in Jerusalem, and a prophet is telling you what's going to happen, and it's all doom and gloom. And somebody else comes up and says, wait a minute, I've been talking to God. Here's the message he gave me.
Yeah.
Everything is okay.
Yeah. Who do you trust?
Well, you want to trust everything is okay, and how can you not? And that's the problem with the false prophet, is they're leading the people away from the truth.
Yeah. There, verse 7, have you not seen a false vision and announced a lying omen when you say, the Lord declares, although I myself never spoke? I mean, you're putting words in God's mouth. This is in fact, this is the violation of the third commandment. Do not misuse my name. Do not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. It's to misuse his name for your own agenda. It's like identity theft. It's really what it is, right? They're standing there saying, this is what God said. And he said, excuse me?
I did not say that.
I did not say that.
Yeah. So God said he's going to send a great storm to destroy the houses, and a false wall that the false prophets built is going to fall down on them.
Yep.
Seems to be literal. Maybe it's figurative.
Yeah, well, the people will be able to
both.
see what really happens when Nebuchadnezzar does come in and the false prophets are proven false.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, and I'm not picking on women, but there's also a number of female false prophets.
Yeah.
We don't hear that a lot with the female prophets. And these women seem to be wearing a wristband and a headband, but also prophesizing when they're making stuff up.
Yeah, he says, from your own imagination, you know.
Yeah.
And the thing is, we see that today. And like you said, it's not just women, it's men and women. But we see people all over the place, even today, saying, you know, this is the word of, I got this message from God, and I've heard from God, and all this stuff. And, you know, this is not God necessarily talking to people today, but it's the same response. You're misusing my name for your own agenda. I did not say that. And, you know, it happens all over the place.
Right. Okay, so chapter 14, I have a little bit of a question on, because Ezekiel meets with Israel's leaders. So we know he's in Babylon. We know he's having visions and going back to Jerusalem. So are we in Babylon or Jerusalem here?
We are in Babylon. Okay. And what's interesting is that even though, see, technically Jerusalem or Israel is a captive country, but they're paying tribute to Nebuchadnezzar, right? So people can travel back and forth. So if Ezekiel is actually God's spokesman, it makes sense that some of the elders from Israel, from Jerusalem, may come see him. Or it could be elders who
have been made captive.
Yeah.
Right, taken captive.
Right. Or the elders from, either they've been taken captive or they were made elders in the captivity for the group that was
because to me, if I'm Nebuchadnezzar and I'm going into a place, I am taking hostages back, and those hostages would have been leaders of the time.
Yeah.
And then in my mind, I want to install my people as the leaders, you know, in Jerusalem.
Right, which he did, and finally, when he wiped it out the next time, it doesn't matter. But so men came from Israel's elders. Some men from Israel's elders came to see me and sat down. They're not necessarily. It's not that Ezekiel has gone back to Jerusalem. He's a captive, but some of the free people can go back and forth.
Right. So Ezekiel is said to prophesy against these people, and he was told to earlier, right? Look at what these people are doing, and God says that they have erected idols in their hearts and placed them in front of themselves. So it's still idolatry to these people that are in Babylon.
Yeah,
and I mean,
you know,
what's
what's interesting though is that what God accomplishes here is really good, because after the exile and then the return, Israel never returned to idolatry. They never. They did in fact learn their lesson.
This is all.
They did in fact learn their
This
lesson.
is Ezekiel saying, you don't see, this is the reason why,
Yeah.
is idolatry that you're turning away. And, for me, one of the things I was thinking about is, how stupid can they be for this?
Okay.
And then, a little ping comes on my shoulder and says, yeah, what about you?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, so what are we doing in our lives
Right.
that is absolutely stupid here, too?
Well, and this phrase that you've erected idols in your heart. Idols are not just, sometimes we think of
true object.
idolatry, especially ancient idolatry, physical things. These guys had idols in their hearts as well as the physical things. So it's not just it's a heart thing.
Right, but this could be love of money. This could be a sin that you've rationalized in your heart that
Right.
it's okay.
Right. The difference between Israel then and Israel today, I said they learned their lesson, is the difference between personal individual idolatry and
Right,
national
nation.
idolatry. These are still the elders of the nation. These are the leaders of the nation, right? The spokesmen of the nation. So
Then God turns into a bunch of supposed lessons. Suppose this happens, and you're thinking, okay, this is just hypothetical situation here.
Right.
But suppose a country is unfaithful, and God cuts off the bread. Okay, that'll happen. And then God goes into what's the cause and effect here. This causes a famine, and people and animals are going to die. And God says, even if, and he lists a bunch of people, right, that we all know, Noah, Daniel, Job, even if they were there, now they may be able to save themselves, but everybody else is going to die.
yeah.
Kind of an interesting concept here.
Yeah, because think back to Abraham. When God says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham says, what if there are so many people, righteous people?
What if there's 100?
I'll save the whole city if it were for these handful of people, right? So he couldn't even find 10 people in Abraham's case. Okay, but what if they're really, 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 really good people? And he mentions Noah.
Right.
He's the only one saved out of the whole thing. Job,
Right.
which is a super righteous guy, right? And Daniel, okay, which Daniel is one of the few people in the Bible that is never no sin is ever mentioned against him. Of course, he was a sinner, but no sin is ever mentioned, right?
Right. Which we hear with Noah and Job.
Well, Job does sin, Noah does sin, right? But they're super
still,
righteous people,
yeah, exactly.
right? But God mentions these three guys twice in this chapter as examples of, even if all three of them, with their combined righteousness, they're still going to
city's
save
still
only
not gonna
themselves,
take it,
right? What I like about this is that some people look at Noah and Job as, fictional characters. Well, there's a Noah, and Job is just some legend out there. So yeah, you can have them as extra super righteous people. Daniel was alive. He was a contemporary of Ezekiel.
Right.
Ezekiel's in Babylon. Daniel's in Babylon at that same time. So the fact
It's
that
pretty wild, isn't it?
God uses these three
Yeah, but during the time that he's living.
right? He's not just some legend,
Right.
He may have been a legend at that point, the way we use the term, but he's alive. He's still in government power at this point. And in fact, this is only maybe 7-8 years or so, roughly 6 or 7 years after Daniel was captured, which means he is still near the height of his popularity. He's interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He's in charge of all the magi. He's still a young guy. In fact, he may be younger than Ezekiel at this point, right? But the fact that God listed two people whom some people consider fictional, Noah and Job, along with a real guy.
Right. Gives much more credence.
Yeah. Right, so God treats these people as
real,
so
legitimate,
so I think that's good for us as we look at
definitely.
this.
So God then uses that same scenario, changing. I cut off the bread with different examples. So say God added wild animals and allowed them to roam in there, and then he comes through and says, say a country is unfaithful to me, so I allow the sword to be passed through it. And then say, a country is unfaithful to me and I allow a plague to go through there. And then he ends this with, how much worse will it be when I make all four of these happen, right? So Jerusalem is going to have their bread cut off. Jerusalem is going to have wild animals released in there. Jerusalem is going to have the sword brought through, which we know is going to be Babylon. And Jerusalem is going to have a plague run through there with all the diseases that.
And if there's
that
no
run through.
hope of rescue or salvation from even one of them, how much more when all four of them God brings against them, right?
So then we end in chapter 15, and the residents of Jerusalem will be providing the fuel for a fire, and God is going to make the land desolate.
Yeah.
And because they acted so unfaithfully.
Yep.
And again, what we see here is God pouring out his wrath, yet understanding that a remnant still needs to be saved.
Yep. But it's so you will know that I am the Lord. Then you will know that I am the Lord.
Right.
When I set my face against them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so there is all this destruction, but there's the hope, there's the promise of the remnant. They will come back. They will be faithful again.
Yeah, and that's what you're going to be reading this week.
Yeah. Yeah. So not so much with the object lessons this time, a little bit more with the vision and prophecy. We'll get back to object lessons here soon. But yes, there is the judgment part. Focus on the hope as well, though, because God is still a God who keeps his promises and is trustworthy. And that's one of the things that we can definitely take away from this, the reading this week. So share your thoughts and questions with us. We love to hear those. Share this video and the links with your family and friends who need to hear the same thing. And we'll see you back here next time as we pick up in chapter 16.